My name is Tanya Verhulp, and I'm the Director of Executive Education here at the Haskayne School of Business. Thank you all for joining us today to spend some time for the next session as part of our series, Haskayne Connects. Thank you to many of you who've joined us for the last 4 sessions now, and welcome to everyone who's joining for the first time. Haskayne Connects was created to help you navigate through these uncertain times with quick tips and ideas to move forward. We're hosting these sessions every week on a variety of topics, so continue to watch for upcoming invitations, and hopefully you'll continue to join us. All previous sessions have been recorded and are posted on our website if you're interested. We ask that you hold your questions until the end. We have plenty of time, left plenty of time at the end to take as many as we can. I would now like to welcome Catherine Connolly, who will be moderating our session today.
Thank you so much, Tanya. I really appreciate it. I have the honor of working with Michael Robinson today, and you should have seen his bio flashing by prior to starting the session. This is the 3rd session that I have had the pleasure of moderating, and I just love the tenor of these sessions. We're examining issues presented by COVID and determining how they can be a catalyst for opportunity. And to that end, today's session is focused on imagining a rejuvenated Alberta. And what I know is that we're making great strides in making this a reality. I'm hoping that you will find some optimism in the data and information that we're providing today. And with that, I'll hand it over to Michael.
Great, thank you, Kathy. And I'm going to just get rolling here on this discussion. Real pleasure to be here with you today as I go. And the current slide. There we go. Okay, and this is an important topic, I believe. This obviously isn't how we adjust in the next few months. This is a longer term adjustment process for the province of Alberta. I think it was just useful in the current environment we're in. We all know the challenges that we face. It's nice to get some good news, and I think this is where we're taking this discussion today. What are some of the things that we can build off of as we think about what Alberta could look like in the future? And so the topic and the layout we've identified here is, first, I want to address this concept that people have that Alberta has to diversify its economy. And yes, we do, but it's not as bad as people perceive. We do have reasonable diversification. I'll just show that in terms of a comparison with the rest of Canada here. Highlight some of the good things that are going on in terms of the ability of early stage technology companies to raise capital and some of the initiatives that have come forward in recent years. Again, roll through to some recent events and then think about what can we all collectively do to move this to the next level. There's a responsibility all of us have as Albertans, and that's the perspective I'm taking today, is as someone in the province of Alberta, not as someone in the city of Calgary. And so this is some data. I gathered this from the Business Council of Alberta report 2020, and it basically looks at a measure of economic diversification. And it's not necessarily important how you calculate the number. I'm happy to have that offline discussion if you want. But what you're seeing here is a graph that shows the extent of diversification. And what's important to know is that the higher the bar, the less diversified; the lower the bar, the more diversified. So going from left to right, you see the least diversified in the Canadian ecosystem is Newfoundland, and then we've got Nova Scotia, and then Alberta's in there, but we're not that bad compared to the rest of the country. Manitoba, for some reason, stands out as the most diversified. Now, this is
Michael,
28.
Just quickly then, if I can group, is Newfoundland is sort of an outlier, but is it fair to say that all the rest of us are pretty much equal? Although if I was Manitoba, I'd be claiming it a win, but for the most part, we're all kind of equal. Is that fair?
As of 2018, and that was unfortunately a time period, and this is where we are right now, where energy is not very robust. Prices have come down. And so if I extend the analysis here, we can see that there are periods in time when it looks like we're not very diversified. And this graph just shows Alberta versus Manitoba, the most diversified at different points in time, 1998, 2008, and 2018. And the 2018 was what we just looked at. You can see 2008 stands out as that period of time where Alberta does not look diversified. And that was a good period of time. So it's kind of interesting that in our really robust economic periods, we don't have good diversification. And now when we're in sort of a lull on the energy side, we say, well, we're better diversified. But of course, that's not a good news story.
The quickest way to diversify seems to have the energy sector crash, but I would suggest the best way to diversify might be to sustain a healthy energy sector, but maintain or build other sectors as fast or even faster. Like be cognizant that you need to focus attention on other sectors. Correct?
Exactly right. And that's where we're going to take this. What can we learn from this? We can learn that we have over-reliance upon the energy sector at certain points in time, and we have lots that we can build on. So it's not just oil is down, everything's doom and gloom. It's let's think about what are the things we can build on that will give us that sustainability, even if energy has its ups and downs as we've observed across time. And so what are some of the initiatives that are going forward that are going to give us that good news story in the future? And that's where I want to take the rest of the discussion here as we go forward. So yeah, great. Thank you. And just some of you know this. I mean, I'm sure many of the people on the call I've met personally in the past, but many of you know that we have this robust ecosystem in Alberta for financing of early stage companies. Traditionally, it was in the energy sector through our junior public markets programs that we had with the ASC and then the TSXV. But what we're observing today and more recently is that the angel community is getting to be stronger and stronger in Alberta. And I think that's a real change, and that's a wonderful change. And I'll highlight more of how that's come about in the future. And you know that, Kathy, the interactions you've got with these people as well as showing you some of the wonderful things going on.
And actually, there's some of them are so wonderful, I've invested myself.
Yes, and you're one of those angels that are out there providing this support into this ecosystem, as am I. And so I'll talk specifically some initiatives I know about. There's many I don't know about, but certainly the one that I have a lot of experience with is the Creative Destruction Lab Rockies program. And I'll talk more fully about that program in a minute. But that started in 2017 and has, I think, had a real game changer in terms of how this whole ecosystem is evolving in Alberta. Certainly there's other great initiatives. Valhalla Angels is a group as well out of the province of Alberta with initiatives into BC as well. And they were named the 2018 and 2019 Angel of the Year by the National Angel Capital Organization. So there's great things we can build on here.
Well, and the other thing is, Michael, I don't want to overlook family offices because they tend to be a group that doesn't like a lot of attention paid to them, but they are a huge contributor to this angel investment community, and are being more prolific in terms of their investments in Alberta.
Yeah, and one of the things I'm going to highlight that as we go forward, it's a very good point. We'll look at this idea that there's been more money deployed in the angel community, but then institutional money as well. And institutional money tends to come from venture capitalists. And we're looking and seeing data that shows the absolute levels of investment in Alberta have been increasing in recent years. And relative to the rest of Canada, we're getting stronger. And I just wanted to pick up on that idea, and we'll highlight that. This data typically does not include family firms because they're not usually reporting to the organization that collects this data. But this is across time, going from left to right, 2014 to 2019, and it shows the absolute amount of venture capital investment being made in Alberta during this time frame, as reported by the Canadian Venture Capital Association. And we can see 2014, 2015, and so on, it's around $50 to $100 million, and then we spike up nicely over $200 million in the year 2019. So great, even in this lull that we've had in the energy sector, we're seeing that the technology sector is able to attract this capital, and this is for early stage technology organizations.
Well, there was a lot of dry powder sitting on the sidelines and waiting for an ecosystem to be put in place that would enable this type of investment. And I think you're going to talk about that.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the good news. The bad news is we're still not where we have to be compared to the rest of the country. And this shows our relative level in terms of the dollar amount invested in Alberta versus other provinces in Canada in a total. And just for comparison purposes, you can see that the total amount deployed into venture capital in 2019 was over $6 billion. And so we're pretty happy at $230 million, but that's only 3.7% of the total amount deployed across the country. Given that Alberta represents about 15.5% of Canada's GDP, 3.7% is not kind of our what we would think we'd want to have proportionately. And so we're doing better, but we could do a lot better.
Well, yeah, but the other thing that I think is important to note on this graph is Kim Furlong, the CEO of the organization that produced this graph, said that Alberta is primed for growth, and this isn't the whole story. So we have people in Alberta that are not afraid of risk. We've gone through the ups and downs of the energy cycle, and we just needed to put in place the ecosystem for investment. And like we referred to earlier, I think we're on the way to doing that, and I think we're going to see a change in this graph.
I very much hope so, and I'm very confident as you are. And this is a good news talk here today. It's about where the future is going to be. It's not about where we've been, it's where we're going. And just some great initiatives, and I'll just highlight some of them. These are at the University of Calgary, but many of you know, Innovate Calgary's been doing great work for over 30 years, commercializing technology out of the university research labs. And they set up in 2019 a life sciences innovation hub. And there's a number of reasons for that, but some of you who know this ecosystem pretty well know that in 2019, Parvus Therapeutics was able to sign a deal with Genentech for $1 billion to develop treatments for autoimmune disorders in Alberta. So that's just a great news story. It came out of the research labs. Now that was a 10-year success story to get to this point in time, and that's kind of the time frame you need for this type of life sciences. But it's nice to see that investment being made to create that next generation of wonderful ventures coming out of this. And as I mentioned, the CDL Rockies program has been sort of that step function change in terms of what's going on in the Alberta ecosystem. And just picking up on your earlier comment, Kathy, what we've observed here is that it's brought together successful tech entrepreneurs with seasoned oil and gas executives and investors, and then those members of the family offices. And there's been this wonderful discourse going on there. These individuals are asked to provide both mentoring and to write checks to support these early stage technology companies. But it's got broader than just Alberta. It's gotten so that we've got investors coming from across Canada and from Silicon Valley looking at the deal flow that's coming through this particular program. And we're getting ventures from across the country coming in. I just want to anecdotally add a little story here that happened. As with all of our world, we moved on Zoom, and the CDL program has moved on to Zoom. And there's these meetings on a regular basis where the companies get together with their mentors, and the mentors are asked to think about writing checks to support these companies as they go through the stages of development. And this whole being on Zoom started in Atlantic Canada, and Calgary was the last site that actually was on Zoom. And what was happening in the other cities was that when the companies put an ask out for money, nobody was giving them any capital. It was just silence in the room when the people were saying, please put your hand up if you want to support these companies. And then in Alberta, this just last month, they had the discussion about how many were willing to support these companies. Hands went up all over the place. And one of the people from Toronto said, this is unusual. We didn't see this across the country. Why is this happening? And the initiative, somebody made the point that Calgary's always been a key center for risk capital in Canada, and we're just seeing that in this initiative. Traditionally, it's been energy, but now we're seeing it deployed into the tech sector.
We just needed a hub to connect a number of these entities together. It was always there, but the connecting points were missing, and I think that's largely been solved or on its way to being solved.
Yeah, and just goodwill all around. Like I said, this is about Alberta, so we're working with the University of Alberta, Olds College, University of Lethbridge. We're now reaching out across the prairies, University of Saskatchewan, and others, University of Manitoba. So we want this to be bigger than just Calgary. We want this to be Alberta and the prairies, really, is what we're hoping we can develop here. And just to give you some broad data here, this is the data out of the current cohort of the CDL program. And this is information to share and just to show you kind of the diversity, both in the nature of the companies that are coming in and where they're coming from. And so just working across the top there, we can see 4 of the current portfolio have a strength in the agricultural sector. And we see that as a growth area. And actually the CDL Rockies program is going to be putting a lot more energy into food security, broadly defined, in ag biotech going forward in the program. You've got hardware and software, sensors, software as a service, advanced materials. And just looking where the deals come from, you can see 70% of the deals are from Alberta. Edmonton obviously is part of Alberta. It's just the way the data is presented there. But across other locations too, across Canada and around the world. And so we're seeing that this notion of a hub, we're attracting deal flow from around different parts of the world, which is great.
I have to put in a plug though, Michael, because I noticed there that 28% female founders. And I work and breathe in this space, and I have to tell you that in general, less than 5% of venture capital enterprises have female founders to them in the general expanse. So this is huge. But I also want to put a plug for Alberta, because for once the numbers are on our side. With 30% of Alberta tech startups are founded or co-founded by women. I know that's a little bit different than the 28, but that's outside of CDL. That's on the broader Alberta forefront. So our province actually leads the nation in female entrepreneurship.
And that's true of the CDL program as well. They keep this data across the country. And in terms of female founders, Alberta, CDL Rockies Prime program stream is higher than the rest of the country. That's fantastic. We've got wonderful people that are creating great world-changing corporations here. Just to build on that and talk about the specific energy stream here, you can see a broader diversity of the nature of the deals, energy storage, advanced materials, and so on there. But the other interesting thing is the deals. You can see just a third are from Alberta, and the rest were drawing good deal flow from around different parts of the world, California on the clean tech side specifically, and so on. The nice thing is a lot of these companies come up here, they get to interact with our ecosystem, they get to see the customer base, they get to think about how could I deploy my technology. We've had some of them move and set up shop here in Alberta. So this is a good place to build and grow my company. And so that's been fantastic as an outcome for this program.
Anecdotally, I've also heard people say they love the fact here that they can pick up the phone and get a meeting with people. People are very receptive to new ideas. As long as you're organized, you come in, you don't waste their time, etc., and you're succinct. But the culture here is much different than other places. We are willing to listen to new ideas.
Yeah, exactly. And that's part of the takeaway at the end of this all is to how to help continue to get the momentum going. So how do we move it to the next level? Well, certainly we've observed these tech firms coming in and through the CDL Rocket program, they get good mentoring. And a lot of times it's how do you take your idea and turn it into a business? Like you've got this great fantastic technology, but that's not enough. You have to figure out where your customers are going to be and how do you satisfy their need better than anyone else? And how do you make that sustainable going forward? And so that customer focus is something that is important and is becoming more of a focus for these discussions. Develop a marketing brand across the country. We have to think broadly. We have to think bigger. It's not just enough to say, I want to be the best in Alberta. I want to be the best in Canada. You have to think, I want to be the best company in the world in this space. And you know, there's people in that room to provide that kind of support. And you and I've had this chat about, you know, 2008 was a difficult time period in the world economic system, but Canada was somewhat immune to those changes. So we didn't really make big changes. You know, our banks were robust, our energy sector stayed robust through that time period. And so we didn't really feel the pain that the rest of the world did. So we didn't make the adjustments that we're probably going to have to start to think very carefully about now.
Well, and it's funny because now I would suggest it's a little bit different too. 2008 was sort of the big banks were too big to fail. And now we're kind of looking at, because we have a different situation, we're saying the small to medium-sized industries are too small to fail. We don't want to choke them out so that ultimately they don't live, because that could hurt us collectively, but individually in a more direct way. And it may also have a delayed impact before we see those things to be able to make the correct changes, right?
Yeah, very much so. And that gets to some of our advantages. And I know earlier talks discussed the whole way that supply chains have been disrupted through this process. And some of the small, medium-sized enterprises have that capacity to go in and fill that void with advanced materials, advanced manufacturing technology, different kinds of issues that they can employ there. So we've got great people, we've got a lot of energy, we've got the ecosystem, we've got good agriculture, we've got access to fresh water, some of the things that the world is going to need. We've got great human capital, and I saw some questions were asked earlier. How do we build the human capital capacity to be able to take advantage of these opportunities? And I'll just highlight a few things. Like one of the things I talked about in the CDL program was about how the companies get this mentoring. Well, we have MBA students in there as well, and they're learning what does it take. They're hands-on helping those companies get to the next stage of development. So they're getting that development of their human capital so they can be effective there. And some of our students have gone on to become co-founders of some of these companies, and some are now CEOs of those companies. So pretty good outcome of that exercise. The Schulich School of Engineering's got great technology. I know that. The Cummings School of Medicine. Out of the U of A, you've got AMI, the Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute's been doing some great work. So it's just a case of getting from technology to businesses, and that's really the focus. We've got to be working that way. We've had success stories, and partly it's a shared responsibility. We have to share some of these success stories, and you have had this chat, talked about Solium Capital, sold last year for $1.1 billion, built and scaled here in Alberta. You've got Benevity, a B Corp, $400 million valuation, 600 employees, started a Bubba Shawarma shop in Calgary here about 10 years ago, and now it's a world leader in 250 of its clients are Fortune 1000 companies. So, you know, Canadians and Albertans can win this battle. We just have to.
And Michael, I need to interrupt you here because this is something we hadn't discussed earlier, but I want to get out there. One of the questions was, how can a public service person or how can somebody in a big corporation have a shared responsibility for entrepreneurship? And I'd like to use Michael Robinson as an example of that, because he actually, Michael, you were in the University of Calgary, and 15 years ago or so, you and Lauren Falkenberg started the ICD program. That program, Back to Entrepreneurship, they couldn't get people to sign up to take it at first. Dick Haskayne had to make a few phone calls and call it a few favors. Well, now arguably it's one of the most successful programs, and it's across the country, and it's just flourishing. And then CDL itself, you were largely responsible for bringing CDL in. Both of those programs were highly entrepreneurial and were done from somebody from a university environment. So yes, you weren't doing your own startup, but you were providing enabling activities, et cetera, that allowed startups to succeed. So kudos to you.
Oh, thank you for that.
He didn't know I was going to say that, by the way.
No, okay. Thank you for that. And I'm a little older than that, but the average age of an entrepreneur actually is about early 40s. So, you know, those people that are working in corporations and saying, gee, how can I make a difference? You know, if you see a business opportunity, you know, we're going to talk about this in a minute. There are support organizations out there to help you turn that into a business there. And if you're somebody that works in the government sector, you know, just sharing stories and being supportive. We talked about this. A lot of these early stage companies need a first customer, somebody that's willing to listen to them, or somebody's willing to tell them, here's my problems, and take some time, as you said before. It's just help these entrepreneurs take their technology and figure out how it can be helpful to you in your business activities, either in a corporate world or in a government or in a health sector world. What are your problems? Give them some time so that they can understand and work with them. They're not going to be fully baked ideas. They're going to have some rough edges around them. But if you're willing to take the time to invest in them, and they're open and honest. And the other thing for them, of course, is that they have to be willing to listen and learn. And that's one of the key things that we're trying to get across to any of the entrepreneurs that we interact with, is that whole notion about it's a journey. It's not about you being an expert. It's about working collaboratively with all these wonderful people around to help you frame your thinking about where you can take your business.
Exactly.
And so here's some of the organizations that are out there. There's a significant number of them, actually, and you're a member of many of them. I'm a member of many of them as well. And, you know, they're there.
This is just to consolidate. This is just a short list. There are many more than just on this page, correct?
Oh, very much so. And I think as a follow-up, if people are interested in this and they want contacts or connection, or they want to know more information about any of these organizations, we'll think of some way to disseminate that information out to you, because I think it's useful to understand, you know, if I need help, where do I go? But also, how can I help? How can I be part of these organizations? What can I do to help move the next generation of entrepreneurs forward in Alberta? What are the things I can be part of? And so just takeaways, I'm cognizant of the time. I know we're a little beyond what was wanted here, but I think it's important to just, the key takeaway is Albertans can and do develop world-leading technology-based corporations. And it's important to understand that, and we can all be part of that journey for some of these early stage entrepreneurs.
And again, Michael, Zoom has actually helped with that, because now it's opened the world. People don't have to fly, et cetera. So you have contact worldwide much easier. So again, a positive out of all of this.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And Alberta Ventures can attract capital locally and from leading international venture capitalists. I mean, there's no reason we can't play with the big players in the world. And all of us have a role. You said, I have a role as a member of the university. I've been happy to play that role for a number of years, and other people in different sectors have a role to play in supporting the growth of that next generation of tech-based startups in Alberta. So that's the good news story. Now let's take questions.
Sounds good. I'll hand it over to Tanya.
Great. So if anyone has a question for Kathy or Michael, if you go to the bottom of your screen and press the participants button, there's an option to raise your hand. So if you want to raise your hand, we'll call on you in order, or you can alternatively ask your question in the chat box as well. Maybe while we're waiting for people to do that, I will ask a question that did come in. Can you discuss how to encourage innovation without incurring too much cost from the ideas that come in?
Okay, well, there's a lot of processes you can work your way through. There's a whole sequence of ideation processes that you can look at. And a lot of that entails, again, getting to really understand what your customer needs are. The critical thing in an early stage company is to figure out what is that pain point that the customer has. And rather than look for how to use this technology to solve a problem, look for the problem first and then back up and try and do that. So it doesn't take a lot of resources to go out there and make calls. One of the key things that we'll say to CDL companies that are coming in, early stage technology companies, is say, okay, you have to go talk to 5 potential customers. That's what you have to do over the next 8 weeks to accelerate the development of your business. So don't sit back and reflect and think, here's what I could do, here's what I could do. Go out and ask people. Here's what I want to know about your business. Here's what I want to understand about your problems. And how can I help create a solution for you? So that doesn't take a lot of resources, to be honest. And then, you know, as you start to get that information, you start to get a relationship built with those people. Then you can start to reach out to some of these organizations we put on here. The cost associated with interacting with these people is quite low in many cases. And
sometimes you get free lunch.
Yeah, most people will give you one lunch. And as Kathy says, if you waste their time, that's about it. So be going in there with a thoughtful pitch. Say, here's what I think I could do. Here's who I've talked to. Here's where I need help. And a lot of people, I talk about one of the important things to build your corporation is to have a good board of advisors and a good board of directors somewhere down the road. And sorry, I did that. And so the question becomes, a lot of these people get all hung up on that and say, okay, well, I have to, you know, get a good board of advisors. No, just go talk to people first. You know, there's sort of advisors you need advisors of many types. There's an advisor for you as a person, like, and Kathy and I have talked about this. This is not an easy journey. And Kathy, you had a couple of talks you wanted to add about that what happens to entrepreneurs through this process?
Oh my God. I mean, let's put it this way. Every entrepreneur that I've ever been exposed to, there's been a night at the kitchen table, et cetera, with the team, which usually is 3 or 4 people early on. And it's, we can't make payroll. We can't get to the next day. How are we going to pivot so that we can be successful? And you need to be really resilient in terms of get up, dust yourself off, think about how you can do things differently. Michael said it you need to understand your customer. Don't assume what your customer needs. You may have a good idea, but if your customer doesn't see it that way, then you're hooped. I agree with everything Michael said. We said, you pick up the phone. People are more than willing to talk to you. But the other piece of it is you need to lead and set up a culture that stimulates people so that they get excited about generating new ideas. So they get excited. I mean, people wanting to come to work every day and generating ideas off of one another. I know that sounds HR-y. Being trained in engineering, I can probably get away with saying something like that because we're not typically like that type of person. But honest to God, you need to set up a culture of innovation where people get excited about that. And that's just how you ask questions. That's how you react to difficult problems. And that's very important in setting up a team that all lines up together and it doesn't cost you a thing.
I just wanted to add one point there. It's an interesting anecdote I received from one of our MBA graduates who's now a CEO of a corporation. And engineers like to have the answer a lot of times because they're trained to come up with the answer. And it's frustrating when you're struggling and not being able to answer. And so this is a female CEO, and she says, I motivate people. I say, don't you want to be the first person in the world to solve this problem? Doesn't that get you excited? And so just changing your mindset, it's not a challenge, it's an opportunity to be able to do something unique and exciting that nobody else has done before. And that gets you to want to come into work in the morning.
And a culture that shares some of the failures so that you can move past those. I don't know if anybody ever saw the interview of the woman that started the Spanx firm, but when she was growing up, they asked her what was one of the pivotal things that helped her be a successful entrepreneur and set up a culture of entrepreneurialism. And she said every night when they had dinner, her father asked her and her brother what failures did they have that day and what did they learn from them. That's quite different than, you know, trying to hide them or bury them underneath the carpet.
Hopefully we answered your question, Tanya.
Great. We deviated a bit.
Okay, that's good. Great. So the next one is from Neil. How can alumni volunteer in venture capital enabling organizations?
Oh, goodness. Well, certainly at the Haskayne School, we've got the Hunter Center, and Team Hunter is an organization that provides mentoring and support and judging and all kinds of things to help our undergraduate students and our master's students learn about this ecosystem and how they could be successful in there. Specifically on the venture capital side, that's a more difficult problem because venture capital is very specialized. And so we'd have to think about that. Certainly there's organizations like the A100, which is the top angel investors in Alberta that provide mentoring and support to early stage technology companies. So that may be a vehicle and an organization that would be a good one to join for somebody that has had success in the past, has learned from failures, or has experienced some pivots along the way, whatever it is that they can share. So those are two examples that spring to mind very quickly. Certainly the CDL Rockies program is always looking for new fellows and associates to join the program, and I know the person responsible there, and again, follow up with an email, and I'm happy to put you in touch with people I know there.
Well, and the slide, I think it was slide 12 that Michael showed, and that's just a few of the organizations, but a number, they all know one another. So in other words, if you go to Rainforest, a lot of the time, a lot of the people that are part of CDL and other things attend those lunches, et cetera, too. So there's just a network, a mesh out there. And sometimes it's just good to attend a number of these sessions to figure out where your niche is, where your strengths are, your weaknesses, and that can help you define how you can contribute best for your set of circumstances.
Tanya, I'm going to ask a question. Do you want me to stop sharing my screen now, or do you want it to stay up there?
Sure, yeah, you can stop. That's no problem.
Okay.
There was a comment, but there was a long comment from Barry here, but he also asked a question. So maybe I'll just condense it and ask the question part of it. So what is Alberta doing to move us past oil and gas and into future technology and production? And how do we get investment into these industries?
Good question. When you say Alberta, that's obviously a broad category. So I'm going to back off from the government sector because I can't comment specifically about the government sector in terms of some of their initiatives. I do have some ideas about how they could do better things in the future, and maybe they'll come up later on. But certainly we're seeing our industry, we're seeing Northwest Upgrader and the carbon capture and storage associated with that initiative as a way to create new technology that is also going to lower our carbon footprint to get to the future of a lower carbon ecosystem in Alberta, broadly defined. You're seeing grassroots at a number of different organizations as well. So we've got the Carbon X Prize, for example, as another initiative that is again being put forward to try and promote technologies that do initiate carbon capture of some description. Those are some examples. Kathy, I'll turn it over to you and I'll think of some more.
Well, the one thing I would like to focus a little bit on, I know we want to deviate away from oil and gas and diversify ourselves, and I couldn't applaud that more. But I think the one chart that Michael showed earlier in the presentation said we still want a robust energy sector. We just want these other sectors to be migrating almost as quickly. So I just want to put a cautionary note out there. We want to make sure that we still have a sound oil and gas industry. And some of the things that we're doing in oil and gas are very positive. We still could do better, don't get me wrong, but the ARC Energy Institute, Jackie Forrest and Peter Tazakian, take a look at some of their materials, et cetera. I think you'd really be proud in terms of a number of initiatives that we've got in oil and gas that are moving us forward, especially on the carbon front that Michael just mentioned.
Great. So there's another one that just came in. I see a disconnect between the provincial government and some of the organizations you discussed. How do you marry the vibrant ecosystem that exists and government policy and funding?
Well, the Alberta government does have a number of initiatives that are supporting this ecosystem very heavily. So you've got Alberta Innovates, you've got Alberta Enterprise Corporation, which is a fund of funds, which is providing capital for venture capitalists to go and deploy into Alberta firms. They're part of our CDL program. So the government is doing some things positively. The pieces I think that are a little different are on the sort of fiscal policy side. I know there were some changes recently, the Alberta Investor Tax Credit. I was feeling that change should not have been made the way it was. I think that was a valuable program, and that was made. The lowering the overall tax rate was I don't think offset that. Other things that we could do on the fiscal side would be, I know two of my colleagues actually, Uriel Haskayne and Ari Pandis had an article in the Globe and Mail yesterday talking about, for the clean energy side, maybe some initiative like royalty trusts for that kind of sector might be a way to get some capital deployed into that sector. Other things I've seen, and I've heard this before, is the idea about, we can play with our capital gains tax. I mean, if we're trying to get people to be willing to invest both their money and also their careers into these early stage technology companies, which have all the risks and all the angst that Kathy talked about before, maybe we give them a little bit more of an upside incentive by saying, you create this wonderful mechanism, you create this wonderful corporation that's created all this value, all these jobs, all this revenue to the province. Maybe you get to keep more of that in the form of capital gains and less taxation. So there's some things I think they could do there. But overall, I think the Alberta government has some good initiatives that have been very supportive of this ecosystem.
They have, and I'll turn that question around a little bit. And this is reflecting my personal bias here. Whenever I have done a financial spreadsheet or anything else for an entity that I've been working early stage, et cetera, we've never built in government support. We've never built in. So in other words, if you're looking at your cash flow, et cetera, we've never ever depended on any of those things because we just felt it was highly risky. Governments change, et cetera. So it's a nice to have. But you never count on those things. I agree with Michael entirely. I mean, Alberta Innovates has done some remarkable things. I was a little perplexed by the Alberta Investment Tax Credit. I thought that was a really good program, and I felt it was, so maybe the other program that Michael just mentioned can give the government a win. They won't have egg on their face. They can come in a different way and bring something else up that will help the ecosystem. But I actually think Alberta's actually been relatively positive on this space and set up a foundation to be helpful.
I think I just saw a comment pop up there too, and I think this is an area too where, they could be more willing. Alberta Health Services is one of the largest providers of health services across the country, and so being an early customer of some of these new technology companies, if there's a way to kind of help on that side, the customer discovery process, if there's a way to create some more links there, I think that will be a positive. Now, that's not government policy per se, but I think things like that, again, the most important thing for some of these companies is to get in front of a customer and to have that customer share their story and to be willing to take a risk on their technology. And that's tough in the healthcare field. I know all of the challenges associated with that, but nonetheless, Alberta government, if they could be more willing to be a first customer for some of these wonderful technologies being developed, that would be helpful.
Oh, Michael, thank you for saying that, because you just reminded me of something. I worked for a very large organization, plus 18,000 employees at one point, and no one wanted to invest in new technology or new industries. And the reason for that is that the conversation out there was nobody ever got fired for hiring IBM. So in other words, don't take any risk, because if you invest in one of these smaller organizations and it fails, then that could follow you in your career. But if you just invest in an IBM, or, it might not accelerate your career, but you won't feel any repercussions from that. And in actual fact, I had a real experience where we did invest in, startup is probably the wrong terminology, but very early stage IT. And we made senior management aware of the risk we were taking, and they supported us. As long as you make sure the organization is aware of the risks and how you're supporting, and you as an entity, a large corporation, try and manage those risks, so ring fence them a little bit and let things out slowly. I think you're right, Michael. I think there's a lot we can do to support these industries and make it acceptable, to let them into some of these larger corporations, because that allows for some sustainable income and allows them to allows them to focus on their technology versus when is the next check coming in.
Yeah, and the key thing too is when they go out and they try and sell internationally, say, well, have you sold anything domestically? And I go, I haven't done that. And they go, well, why not? And we go, well, that's a tough one sometimes to overcome. We want these to be champions that can take on the world. Well, sometimes supporting locally is a good first step in that process.
Your first customer is the biggest challenge you've got, or one of the biggest.
Great. So there was a question from David about companies will go back to their office spaces with different needs than they previously had. How do we utilize our vacant office spaces in Calgary?
Good question. Well, certainly, to the extent that we can have more of these technology companies move, and some of them have, because of the lower rent and everything that will be effective. Is there a way to repurpose some of that space? I'm not a real estate expert, so I'm just thinking of some of the things that I've read about and heard about here. Co-working spaces, we've got actually quite a bit of that right now. There's been a number of organizations try that. So if we want to get really off the wall, if we think about food security and agriculture, is there any way to repurpose some of those buildings for, more locally oriented food production?
Well, we have a lot of infrastructure as well in Calgary, and there's entities that are looking to flourish, et cetera, and they don't have to make that investment. It's a sunk cost for us already. So it's an incentive to come here. I mean, some of these office buildings, et cetera, are just fabulous, and people are looking for a home, and previously the rents were way too high. And now, they have a lot of options available to them, and we've got the infrastructure, like you said, Michael, CDL, and a number of businesses that are trying to start up in the Alberta space. So my concern is it won't be a quick turnaround. I'm not a real estate expert either, but it's not going to be immediate in terms of the recovery of that space. So there's going to be some vacant space around for a while, probably.
Yeah, and this whole ecosystem development process here takes time, as we've talked about here. And we saw it's like a 10+ year trajectory to get life sciences companies to a point where it's even getting to start to hire some people. Certainly technology companies, when you look at venture capital investors, they think a 5 to 7 year window. So, unfortunately, we're not going to make a huge dent in that number of vacant buildings at this point in time. But as we start the trajectory going, and again, if there's some tax incentives around that, if you can make it more attractive for entities to set up here and to then start here, because again, we've got strong workforce, we've got good energy availability, if we can add some tax incentives to that could attract some corporations in the short run anyway.
Our people are a huge incentive to come here. And I remember this was probably 15 years ago when an organization was looking for a head office, and they didn't want to go to Vancouver and things like that. They wanted a good, innovative, entrepreneurial company around them. They wanted low rents, and they wanted an educated workforce. And Calgary has all that right now.
Great. The next question is, what types of new business opportunities might we expect to open up as a result of the COVID pandemic and the changing preferences and behaviors?
Well, certainly you're going to see some, I think, change on the food security side, and I think people are going to look at that very carefully. The supply chain issue that was discussed in one of the previous Haskayne Connects as well, more local manufacturing. You got the ability to do that with some of the advanced manufacturing technologies. You don't need to have large scale to get the cost structure. And you're going to have, as the shipping costs become higher, it becomes more advantageous to manufacture locally. So those are some ideas we can have there.
That's
Kathy?
one that really surprised me, actually. And as I looked into it further, that local manufacturing, but I think we want to make sure that we take advantage of that quickly. We don't want to be complacent about that, because we've got some opportunities right now, but we need to react quickly, I would suggest. But sorry, Michael.
Yeah, and I mean, just some of the things we've been seeing in the CDL, we've seen some sensor technologies are coming out that are quite world leading. We've got waste remediation, water remediation technologies. And so we're seeing just a whole gamut of opportunities here, advanced materials, both in the life sciences and in the sort of industrial sector. One of the interesting things we're seeing in the CDL Rockies program compared to the other ones is we have more of an industrial base, if you will. The customers tend to be, energy companies or manufacturing companies in some level or another. And so you'll see some interesting things come around our existing industries, because that's just, again, you're going to see companies set up shop close to the customer. So it's not like we're going to go off in a totally new direction necessarily, but we're going to see advances in the way we do the processing of energy in many different ways, new ways of using the oil sands, for example. There's some wonderful research in terms of ways to generate more energy out of that without taking it out of the ground, for example, through nanotechnology. So some of the nanotechnology work is going on. Lithium extraction from some of the existing resources we have is another cool growth area that people are spending some time on. So it's hard to point your finger and say this one's going to win, that one's going to win. It's just nice to see that there's a broad spectrum of ideas out there and some wonderful people and some technology going in a number of directions. So I'm not sure who the winners will be, and that's the wonderful part about it. You don't have to care about who the winners are. You create an ecosystem where they've got a good shot at it, and the winners will come out through the process.
Well, and the only thing that I'll add there, it's more of a higher level issue observation, is we're promoting globalization, but then we need to understand that the US itself is becoming much more insular. And so that dynamic is going to create changes for us here in Canada and Alberta.
We actually had two questions along the same vein. How could we skill up, and I know you touched on this a little bit already, Michael, but how could we skill up the current talent pool in Alberta to respond to the province's innovation needs?
Well, that's obviously a longer term process. Just some interesting things. Again, what we're trying to do here is, Kathy picked up on this, is we're thinking about diversifying the pool of people who think are tech entrepreneurs to include females. I mean, the 51 is a group of female founders, investors who are thinking about that next generation of leaders coming, not just necessarily from the traditional, male sector as you think historically. We do that in the CDL where every session we invite young ladies in high school to try and create more interest in the STEMs as a career for women in that. So I think if we can diversify the pool and get more women engaged in the initiatives here, that would broaden the talent pool significantly. And then just anecdotally, I know historically when the engineering school, for example, would look at they give the top students in the class based on first year performance their choice of what branch they want to study, and historically it would have been petroleum, chemical, and engineering tied into the energy sector, and in recent years it's been computer engineering, software, and whatever. So we're seeing a shift in the mindset of our young folks that are coming out into the university saying, I want to make a difference in this sector. And so again, if we have this sharing of success stories and we start to publicize more of the people who've done wonderful things with technology, it'll, I think, create more initiatives that way. It's not an overnight fix, but I think within the next 10 years, there's going to be some strength come out of that whole process we've seen over the last five years. Anything? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just checking the chat to see if there's anything new in there. What do you think will happen to the tourism industry in the province? Do you have anything to comment on?
Short or long term? I mean, I think short term, we're going to have some challenges, right? Because people are not flying, people are not, this COVID situation for 2020 is just going to be providing some challenges. That being said, people are resilient. So I don't think it's going to have a huge negative impact on tourism long term, but I do think things are going to be done a little bit differently. I mean, think about going to a hotel and doing some of these other things and social distancing. And so it's probably going to be a little bit different. But generally people are resilient, and I see Alberta as a wonderful place to want to come to, and I don't see it being a permanent negative impact to Alberta, or that Alberta is going to be singled out relative to any other destination. As a matter of fact, I would suggest, given the natural that we're not like New York, et cetera. We focus on the natural landscapes and things like that. That's going to probably be a bigger draw more than anything, but that's just a personal view.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on this either, but just two comments. First is it'll be more locally oriented in the short run because, my wife and I are talking, our holidays this year will be in Alberta. It may just make sense, we'll take advantage of the wonderful environment in which we live, and other people will do the same thing. Longer term, though, I think what you're seeing is people are looking for experiences, and certainly we're baby boomers, where millennials are more into balance in their life. They're into wanting to have purpose in their life and the things that'll help them in terms of building these technology companies. But then they're going to want experiences that are allowing them to recharge themselves in a natural environment, as Kathy was saying. And that's one of the wonderful things we've got here. So I think that actually what we have to offer will be more compelling for the next generation of people as they come up, because they want to have that ability to decompress and go out and experience the world in a different way. And we've got a clean environment. the rest of the world, as the world will come back. I don't know if it's a U-shape or a V-shape recovery. It will recover, but we still have pristine situations that people want to come and experience.
We just have to make the effort to sustain that and make sure it stays that way.
Yes, good point.
Great. Well, I think I'm going to just ask the one final question here before we wrap up. How will the energy sector pay for any transformation that might be required to provide cleaner energy while remaining competitive?
Well,
how will it what? Sorry, I missed the first part of that. Sorry.
How will the energy sector pay for any transformation that might be required to provide cleaner energy while remaining competitive?
Well, and you see this, and you talked about ARC before, and the ARC Energy Institute, Kathy. I mean, they've done work on this. The notion is that the world is looking for sustainable practices, business practices, certainly the energy sector. And to the extent that our corporations invest in that technology, they're going to be able to give themselves a longer runway, because there'll be the most clean energy coming from most clean oil, most clean gas coming out. So I think it's a matter of survival. I don't think it's a matter of they have to invest so that they will be able to survive and grow forward. They have to make those investments at this point in time to change the discussion and the discourse around Alberta as a source of clean, reliable energy.
I think that's one thing. It's a little unfortunate. I'm not sure we've done as good a job letting others know some of the advances that we've made. I just pulled out a couple of statistics. Well, first of all, CNRL, Suncor, a number of these big companies are not just talking this, they are actually putting out goals for 2025, 2030, and they're saying we will achieve this. So they're sticking their necks out in terms of what they will achieve, and they're pretty dramatic goals. And then I just pulled out a couple of statistics looking at some of the oil industries. I'm just looking at them on the side here. Like, for example, CNRL cut their greenhouse gases per barrel company-wide by 29% by 2012. And they've done almost as good as that up to 2019. So they now see this as their business model, and they're not looking at this as something that they're looking at this is something that needs to be integrated into their business to be successful. And again, I can't get into all of the details. We just don't have the time here, but I would encourage you to actually go look at the ARC Institute and some of the presentations that have been done by Jackie and Peter, because when I went and looked at some of them, I thought, I'm proud to be an Albertan. We are actually leading edge on a number of these things, and fracking and a number of other activities that we do as part of the oil industry. We're leading edge in terms of how we regulate ourselves, how we deal with waste products, and we just need to continue on that trajectory and let other people know. I mean, I won't name other countries now, but we are at the forefront of some of these initiatives in terms of being socially responsible and environmentally responsible.
And I'll just add to that with the CDL Rockies program, bringing these energy technology companies from around the world, and many of them are looking at these issues, such as how do we do things more effectively, more efficiently. So the extent that we have this outreach program that's allowing this technology to come in, and we have many of those companies that you mentioned in the room hearing about these technologies, willing to provide an opportunity for them to be tested and used in their things. So again, creating that ecosystem where Alberta is seen as the center for research into how to do this better and how to be more effective and more efficient and cleaner in this whole process. I think we're making strides in that direction. We're not getting any credit for it in the world at this point in time, but I think as time progresses, the message will start to get out.
And even more importantly, what I see is we're not becoming complacent and we're not making excuses for ourselves. When I look at CDL Rockies and some of the initiatives that have been presented, they're seeing these as challenges, and we want to get better. And I love that. I mean, we're not throwing up blinders or anything else. We're continually trying to improve upon ourselves.
Great. I'll pass it over to you, Kathy, to wrap up.
Okay. Oh. Well, this has been a very energetic session, so I have to thank Michael and all of the support people that helped us with the session. So that's Lauren, Tanya, Patrick, Janelle, and Sandra. And I also wanted to mention that next week's session with Beth Reimer-Heck and Scott Radford, it's post-viral marketing. Are you digital marketing ready? And so if you have the time and can show up for that, I think it will be well worth your while. So thank you very much for all attending today, and have a safe and happy rest of your week.
Thank you.